Oh my god, it's attacking the city! What is it, boss? It's a big fucking monster! What kind of monster, boss? A fucking gorilla!
Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and reviewing the film with me is my friend Jeremy.
Hi everyone.
Jeremy was with me for the reviews of the Universal Frankenstein films. He was also with me for that Leprechaun retrospective we both did along with our friend Chris on St. Patrick's Day.
Yep.
And then the Nightmare on Elm Street one you were with me for.
Yep.
And then the Batman one, and then the Friday the 13th one.
That's right.
So you've been around the block with my videos.
Yes, I have.
And the movie we want to review is the 1933 classic, actually classic might be kind of an understatement, milestone in movie history, and that is King Kong. This is my copy of King Kong right here. So, when was the first time you saw the original King Kong, and what did you think of it?
When I first saw the original King Kong, it was a while ago, like 2005, around the same time the remake came out, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought, for a film made in 1933, it holds up pretty well today. It's got some great characters, and, especially for the time, it had spectacular special effects, which still look great, when you see the movie today.
Oh, absolutely.
And, it's just one of those great classics.
Yeah, I first saw this movie when I was 13. It was around 2005 as well when the Peter Jackson version came out, and of course I knew who King Kong was all my life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I first saw it when I was 13, and yeah, when I first saw it I was really freaking into it.
Yeah, same here, man.
And one thing I will say about the movie is you'll notice how in a lot of movies that came out in the 1930s, some of them are kind of slow-paced. This moves at an extremely brisk pace.
Yeah,
like the pacing for this movie honestly holds up with the way movies are paced today in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. It definitely, gets right to the action. I would say the time on the ship is pretty short, and, it's pretty, I'd say it's pretty fast-paced from start to finish.
Yeah. Now, you might notice I am doing this review for Horror Month, and I will say, though, it is very debatable whether King Kong is a horror film or not. I would say, in my personal opinion, genre is not really a set-in-stone thing. A movie can be of more than one genre at the same time. But I would say it's mostly an adventure film, but I will argue that the end of the film, where they're in New York City and King Kong is terrorizing the city, that's horror. It does become a horror film in the last 15 minutes, but arguably it's more action-adventure, though.
Yeah, I would agree that it's mostly an action-adventure movie, but yeah, it definitely does have scenes which could definitely be classified as horror. I mean, even before Kong gets to New York City, when you're on Skull Island, especially when you watch the men who are trying to rescue Ann Darrow deal with the creatures on Skull Island, a lot of that could be considered horror, especially during the swamp scene when you see a guy just get picked off by that swamp monster. That's pretty horrific.
Now, King Kong was directed by Merian C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack or Schoedsack. I have no idea how to say his last name. It was also written by James A. Creelman and Ruth Rose, and it was based on an idea from Merian C. Cooper and Edgar Wallace. Now, many of the people who worked on this movie the year prior to this did the movie The Most Dangerous Game. Also released the previous year was actually a novelization of King Kong based on the screenplay, and I wonder if the King Kong novelization was one of the first movie novelizations, as in a book based on a movie. Now, the plot of King Kong is it follows this filmmaker named Carl Denham, who is trying to make a movie, but he needs an actress, and he ends up more or less taking this girl named Ann Darrow off the street and making her the lead in his film. He does ask for her permission, of course, but he does basically take her off the street. Carl Denham, Ann Darrow, and the crew of this ship set sail for a mysterious island that Denham heard about called Skull Island. that is supposedly home to a god called Kong. They get to the island, and the natives want to sacrifice Anne to Kong. They end up kidnapping Anne, and it turns out that Kong is actually a giant gorilla that the natives worship as a god. Kong takes Anne deep into the jungle. The first mate of the ship, Jack Driscoll, who started to develop a romance with Anne, goes off into the jungle along with other shipmates to find her. They end up facing dinosaurs and other monsters on this island, and eventually Jack saves Anne. Eventually Kong is captured and taken to New York City to be made into an attraction, but Kong escapes and terrorizes New York. And that's the basic plot line of King Kong. Now, in the film, Robert Armstrong plays Carl Denham, Fay Wray plays Ann Darrow, Bruce Cabot plays Jack Driscoll, Frank Reicher plays Captain Englehorn, and Victor Wong, not to be confused with another Asian American actor of the same name who would appear in many films in the 80s, plays Charlie the Cook. So, what do you think of the acting and the characters in this film?
I like it. You know, they all do such a great job. I especially like Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he really has that sort of adventurous sort of spirit in him. And, you know he's kind of crazy to bring them all to this mysterious place, but, you know, he has this likability where you can still, you know, like him and sympathize with him, even though he is putting all these people in danger.
Oh, absolutely. Like, Robert Armstrong, I think he freaking oozes charisma in this movie.
Yeah,
like,
he does.
He's just, like, so freaking likable as this guy who, yeah, when you really think about what he's doing, he's kind of a douchebag, but
Yep.
still, he's just so likable and so charismatic that you don't care that he's a douchebag.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Characters like Jack Driscoll, he's a good character, but he's also blatantly misogynistic in the film.
Yeah, I can't argue that. He definitely has something against women. Get more likable, though, as the movie goes on, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then Ann Darrow is a very sympathetic character, even though she is very stereotypical for the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, she's out of work during the Great Depression, she's hungry, so you sympathize with her, you know, especially since, you know, it's for her, I think it's basically either go with Carl Denham on this weird, mysterious trip, or starve.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't really have much of a choice there. Captain Englehorn.
Oh, Englehorn's a great character.
Yeah, he's also very likable, and, you know, I like that he tries to be, I guess you could say, when they get to the island, the keeper of the peace between the crew and the natives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, although, of course, that ultimately falls apart. As I said before, it is a great classic monster movie, and it's very enjoyable from start to finish, and I think it holds up very well today.
Yeah, no, King Kong is just such a iconic film, and I will say that even if you don't like this movie at all, you got to at least respect this film, because this movie did so much for special effects at the time. I mean, Willis O'Brien's effects work in this film is just so beautiful. Like, yeah, you could tell it's stop motion, but still, there's a magic to stop motion effects.
Yeah, and I mean, all the time and hard work that goes into it. Plus, you know, the audiences of 1933 did not, you know, they didn't have things like CGI, you know, or stuff like that we have today. So, you know, they'd never seen that before. So to them, seeing this kind of special effects work on the big screen was, like, revolutionary.
Yeah, now, to be fair, before this, there was the 1925 film, The Lost World, which I think Willis O'Brien also did the effects work for. Am I right on that?
I think so.
Yeah, well, that you could tell that was probably an inspiration for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still, I mean, for its time, can you imagine seeing this movie back then in 1933?
Yeah.
Like, I doubt the people seeing it back then knew that they were basically witnessing film history being born.
Yeah, I fully agree. You know, I don't think they knew at the time just how, you know, big of a cultural phenomenon this was going to be even years down the road, you know.
Now, of course, there are a few things that don't really hold up so well. Like, we mentioned already some of the blatant sexism in the film. Like, Ann Darrow, I hate to say it, while she is a likable character, she's also kind of a female stereotype in the film.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
But the only character who, I mean, all the men on the ship, you could tell they have an issue with a woman being on the ship, but the one who's...
to it.
But the one who's blatantly sexist is Jack.
Yeah.
You know, saying things like, women just can't help but to be a bother. Made that way, I guess. And then, like, you know, when she's like, but you hate women, and he doesn't deny it.
Yeah, he's kind of a douche.
At the same time, though, while you can criticize this movie for its sexism, you gotta look at the time, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was a product of its time. Plus, you know, that shouldn't detract from all the great things about it.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, you go back in time, if you went back in time to 1933, even if you met somebody who says that they're not sexist, they would still have views that by today's standards would be considered sexist. Yeah, and then there's some racism in the film.
Oh, yes.
Like, okay, the natives are very stereotypical, but then you have the character of Charlie, who is basically a walking Asian stereotype.
That's correct.
Someday me go back China, I never see... I forgot what he said, but, like, when we leave this place, me no like. The line where, when he finds out that Andaro's been kidnapped, he's like, crazy black man been here!
That would not fly at all today, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. But, once again, it's a product of its time, and that shouldn't, like, distract you from how groundbreaking this film was, and just how great the film is.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I would argue, as an adventure film, this is probably the greatest adventure film ever made.
Yeah, it's an adventure into a strange and mysterious and dangerous land to rescue a beautiful woman taken by a savage beast. It's awesome.
Yeah, and then just some of the fight scenes between King Kong and the dinosaurs, like the T-Rex scene, is just so iconic.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I mean, I'll admit there are parts where, yeah, it does look a little fake, but I mean, it still looks, you know, it's thrilling to watch, and yeah, it still looks fantastic. Although, I must point out, there were times, you know, when Kong is punching the T-Rex where you can clearly see he's missing. But
that's fine. I'm not going to harp on that too much.
But I mean, it's still a great, it's great what they were able to achieve, and as I said, a lot of time and hard work went into it.
Yeah.
You know, they had to move the models bit by bit in order to achieve it. That took hours and hours of commitment, which I commend them for.
Now I want to cut to a few short reviews on this movie that were recorded by some friends of mine.
Now, out of all the giant monster movies, or kaiju as they're called in Asia, I would have to say that King Kong is the second best only to Godzilla for me. I was very young when I first saw this movie, and I was very impressed with how good it was. But then again, I was only about 5. And at that age, you probably could have put on a video of a turd sunbathing on the beach and I would have been impressed by it. So to test this out, I watched the movie again right before seeing the latest reboot of the franchise, and honestly, I still love this film. The film stars one of the hottest women to ever grace the silver screen, Wray, Robert Armstrong, Bruce Cabot, Frank Reicher, and Sam Hardy, and a cast of people dressed up like natives. Now, I don't really go into politics or anything like that, but I know a few people who are very hostile toward this film for its portrayal of the natives, feeling that it is racist. And it is, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't bother me enough to take my love of the film away. I mean, a lot of films back then were pretty fucked up when it came to their portrayals of people of color and women. But the most important thing is that we learn from our mistakes and move on from them. But just so I don't sound like a PBS show, I'll move on to the acting, which is fantastic. Everyone in this film shines and gives it their all, especially Wray. Now, I'm not saying this because of the fact that if I had a time machine, the first thing I would try to do is win her heart and marry her. Because I'm Puerto Rican, and if I went back in time to any century, I'm sure it wouldn't be pleasant. But because she has that scream. There are many scream queens in the history of cinema, but when you can scream so loud that you can knock the wax off somebody's face, at least that's how I took it, you deserve to be recognized as one of the best. And the direction and camera work in this film is, my God, amazing. It's a shame that there are directors out there in our day and age who can never even come close to the directing and camera work in this film, even though back then you had everything against you. No CGI, no computer work, just practical effects and aiming the camera at the right place at the right time, and then messing with the film, not digital recording, afterwards. It's amazing what they were able to do back then. It's just, wow. King Kong himself looks great. Yes, the effects are dated, but you have to think about the time they were in. You have to consider the fact that they didn't have much to work with. And then you really come to admire what they were able to do with them. The scenes where King Kong is battling creatures is amazing. He battles a pterodactyl and saves Wray from its claws, and it's just astounding. It's fantastic to see how Wray is in the shot with both creatures, and you wonder to yourself, how the hell did they do that? Also, the climactic scene when Kong is climbing up the Empire State Building and you can see New York behind him and it's all beautiful and everything. And yes, at times you think to yourself, wait a minute, why does he look bigger in some parts than others? But hey, all is forgiven because it really does work. It's amazing what they were able to do. I mean, he literally grabs Fay Wray in a few scenes and it's like, wow. What was really holding her? Did they have a real hand holding her, or was she just a clay, a claymation type of thing where it was just a giant clay hand grabbing a giant clay woman and then they moved it around and then just filmed it, and made it look like she was moving, or what was going on there? I really don't know. I haven't looked it up, but I don't want to look it up because at the end of the day, just imagining how this was done in my head is just so much better than finding out the truth. And obviously imagination is much better than the truth. Overall, I love this film. It's a true classic and it should definitely be watched by everyone who loves studying the history of cinema.
King Kong is like one of the greatest films of all time, and it's also like one of my favorite films of all time because as a kid growing up watching it, I was like so like amazed for how groundbreaking the special effects were at that time, because I'm thinking to myself, this is the 1930s. This is not CGI. This is all done by like stop motion puppet animation. And also what I loved about it too was I like Fay Wray's portrayal as and there her scream is like so very like realistic. You like root for her to get away from Kong because she's so afraid of him.
Yeah.
And also one of the most shocking things to me as a kid watching it was when King Kong like ripped that dinosaur's jaw off. I was like thinking this is 1933, and this was the first time I ever watched a 30s film where it had blood and gore in it. It was just so like, wow. Bruce Cabot, great chemistry, but the one thing I always found funny as a kid watching it was corny was when they're on the ship, and he goes, say, I think I like it, then he kisses you. I'm like, that's a little bit, again, that was the 30s, that was considered a good line, but today, a little too corny, but again, passable and acceptable.
So I really can't say enough about King Kong. In my personal opinion, it really is the definitive monster movie. It might be a bold statement, but I mean, there's so much that it means to cinema, and there's so much that you can take out of it, and so much that the industry took out of it, and that we took out of it as writers, and that we look up to. I mean, you take Kong, for instance, he's just a great monster. There's something so simple about him. He's just a big gorilla, just on an island with all these crazy-ass creatures on it. It's so cool and distinct and iconic. But even on top of that, there is enough subtext that you won't get bored watching it. You won't feel alienated if you're somebody who likes a little bit more substance in their movies, because there's still a lot of great subtext. And here it's about the clash between society and the wilderness. And it's so perfectly summarized in that last line, it was beauty killed the beast. It shows that there was some thought behind it, even though it was just a crazy, fun, monster B movie. And, I mean, just the effects are incredible for the time. It innovated so much amazing stuff, and the creativity that they used to make these effects work and make it look cool, for the time back then, it was mind-blowing, and it was innovative and incredible. There's really so much that I could say in praise of it. I will say, I mean, obviously today, I guess it doesn't hold up too well, but I think that's if you're I think that's if you scrutinize it too much, because there's just so much that it did, and for the time, it stands strong in that way. I love the characters; they're all likable. I love the direction, it's amazing. I love the score, it's so great, it's so classic. The whole final sequence in New York City is just so amazing and fun and iconic. Yeah. There's nothing but praise that I have for this movie. It's a classic for a reason. There's a reason why we're still making King Kong movies today, and I really hope it's a legacy that never dies, because it's a great, great contribution to cinema, and I love it so much.
Now, this movie was a huge success when it came out, and spawned a sequel later the same year called Son of Kong, which was nowhere near as successful as the first one. Now, there were actually 2 Japanese King Kong movies, but those are now considered to be lost films. Supposedly, all copies of those movies were actually destroyed during the Second World War, from what I've heard. That wasn't the last time Japan would try to tackle King Kong. In the early 1960s, Japanese film company Toho bought the rights to King Kong, and they made King Kong vs. Godzilla, which was also the 3rd film in their Godzilla series. Also in the early 1960s, there was a Rankin Bass animated show called The King Kong Show, which was actually an American and Japanese co-production. Now, that show was adapted into the 1967 film King Kong Escapes, which was also produced by Toho. And then in 1976, there was the Dino De Laurentiis remake, and then that spawned a sequel in 1986. And then in 2005, there was the Peter Jackson remake. And the latest film in the King Kong franchise was Kong Skull Island, which was also set within the same universe as the 2014 Godzilla reboot. And in 2020, there's going to be a remake of King Kong vs. Godzilla, which will be set within the same continuity as Kong Skull Island and Godzilla 2014. The movie also inspired comic books, as well as animated films, and there have been other King Kong animated shows as well. And King Kong, this movie has also had a big influence on films like Creature from the Black Lagoon. You could tell that was influence.
The creature falling in love with the woman and trying to take her for his own, That's sort of the big influence, I think. And
then even Jurassic Park. It's hard to say if Jurassic Park would even exist had it not been for this movie.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of movies, I think, owe a debt to King Kong for how influential it was.
And then even, like, the original Godzilla. The original Godzilla was partly inspired by King Kong, even though the actual story for the original Godzilla has nothing to do with King Kong, and that movie wouldn't exist had it not been for King Kong.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And then, like, you could see King Kong's influence and stuff like... Have you ever seen it was a 1960 British film called Gorgo?
I haven't seen it, but I have heard of it. Yeah, I really don't know too much about it, though. But
it's not a bad movie, but you could definitely see the King Kong influence in that. And then even other stuff with monkeys was so clearly influenced by King Kong. I mean, Merian C. Cooper, who was the co-director of this movie, later on did a film called Mighty Joe Young, which was clearly him trying to recapture the magic of King Kong. And then there was the remake of that, which you could tell was also... that movie still owed something to King Kong as well.
Yeah, I've seen the original Mighty Joe Young, and it's obvious, like you said, that Merian C. Cooper was trying to recapture the magic of King Kong. He also cast Robert Armstrong in a different role in it, and, I think he definitely tried to make this giant monkey a lot more sympathetic than Kong, by having him, be basically persecuted by the humans and also save a bunch of orphans from a fire.
Yeah. And then there's stuff like Donkey Kong. I mean, that's obviously inspired by King Kong in some way. Yeah, the influence of King Kong is everywhere. I mean, there are other monkey movies that use the word Kong in it, like Kong Island, Konga, stuff like that. But as far as the King Kong sequels and reboots go, which ones really stand out to you?
Well, I would say the ones that stand out to me most are Peter Jackson's King Kong, and, I guess Kong Skull Island, and, the others have their moments.
So that was our review of the original King Kong. Our next movie review will be on Son of Kong.